All right. Well, why don't we get started? I think Jen and Kim, let's just do a quick round of intros. I'll continue to monitor. Hello. Hi, Jenna. Thanks for joining. I'll continue to monitor the chat, but welcome everybody to today's lab, the hard work of decarbonizing our gear with Patagonia and Burton. My name is Amy Horton. I'm the Director of Sustainable Business for the Outdoor Industry Association. I also run our climate program at OIA called the Climate Action Corps, which Patagonia and Burton are both members of, and maybe some of you joining the session today. I'll talk in a second about how to join into the discussion. There's a couple of different ways to do that. We definitely want to make this interactive. But first, maybe Jen and Kim, I'll turn it over to you first, Jen, let's just do a quick round of intros.
Sounds great. And thanks for everyone for joining us. Excited for this conversation. I'm Jenn Swain. I am the Director of Global Sustainability at Burton Snowboards. I'm based in Burlington, Vermont. And I also serve on the Sustainability Advisory Council and the Recreation Advisory Council with the Outdoor Industry Association. So I work kind of across the supply chain throughout operations, also in our marketing and communications, and rallying our community through advocacy work as well around climate change.
Awesome. Kim?
Thanks, Amy. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Also excited for the conversation. So my name is Kim Drenner, and I'm a senior manager here at Patagonia. My responsibility is I lead and manage our global kind of supply chain environmental responsibility program. So I work directly with our tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers on the rollout of our environmental programs. So looking at, water, waste, chemistry, and energy and carbon. And before Patagonia, I came from a consulting background where I worked with lots of companies around carbon accounting and assurance. So really excited to kind of dig into the conversation with everyone.
Okay, cool. Well, if you are just joining us, I just want to call out a couple of things. So in the right-hand panel, maybe some of you have joined a lab or joined another session already. We would love to hear from you, who you are, the company you represent. I know we can see that in your little title, but a little bit more color is always welcome. Just letting us know what you're most interested to get out of this particular lab, this particular session, a little bit of maybe what your passion or expertise, passions and expertise is. And then there's also a quick pop quiz, a poll question on the second tab. I can't really tell if anyone's taken that yet. Until I click share results. So we'll just go with that. But yeah, take it. You won't be called out. It's totally anonymous, I think. So click on your answer. That'll help us get a little bit of a feel for your level of knowledge and just kind of how to tailor the discussion today. So to make this interactive, if you would like to join us, you can always type a question in the chat there. And I'm seeing those starting to come in. Thank you. Yeah, Jen and Kim, feel free to check those out too so we can kind of get a feel for what's coming through. You can always drop a question in the chat as we go along. You can also, you should have a you should have a little green button that says share audio and video at the top of your screen. If you want to actually join us on camera and have a discussion, you can do that as well, and we'll monitor and we can bring you on to have a chat. So if there's someone, if there's a topic you're particularly interested in that we're covering and you want to come and share the stage with us, we welcome that. Okay, so again, this lab is all about the hard work of decarbonizing our gear. And when we say gear, we're kind of talking about the whole gamut: soft goods, hard goods, tents, backpacks, snowboards, skis, jackets. Did I say jackets already? Even hiking shoes, running shoes, all of that. And we won't cover all of those different product types in depth, but there are some sort of general lessons and learnings across all of those types of gear that I think we can draw out and discuss today. But before we talk about decarbonizing, so taking the carbon out of that gear and taking the carbon out of the process to make that gear, we thought it'd be good to kind of level set on through some illustrative examples kind of where the carbon is coming from. So this might be a good time actually to kind of go over to our poll, because you might think And one might think, and we hear this quite a bit, that okay, you've placed your order on Amazon or other online retailer perhaps, and what comes to you is a box, and there's a bunch of plastic inside that box and packaging, and you're immediately thinking about the shipping and thinking most likely the carbon is coming from those materials and coming from the distribution. In reality though, right, as we'll talk a little bit more about today, it's not. I'm gonna just click show results and see if any of the poll comments came through. I can't really tell, but no matter what you checked in the poll, the answer is about, let's see, can you guys see the poll there? You can't? Okay, can you see it now? If you click in?
We can take the poll, we don't
Jenny?
see results.
Oh, okay. Well, let's see. Can you see the results now?
Not yet.
I can't really either. I don't either. Well, it doesn't really matter. The answer is 75 to 90% comes from the supply chain. So what percentage of a typical gear brand's total carbon emissions come from the supply chain? It's actually quite a bit. That's where most of the carbon comes from. So that's probably what we'll focus. Most of today's discussion is actually talking about those particular opportunities, but we'll also talk about others. And I thought maybe to illustrate this, and Jenn, we'll start with you, since you gave a talk recently on this earlier in March for our Climate Action Corps community. Just take a snowboard, as a for example. Can you kind of paint a picture for us about where the carbon's coming from for that particular product?
Yeah. So Burton's been measuring the carbon footprint of our snowboards since 2014 using life cycle assessment. Are you getting feedback? Okay.
No, you sound great.
So we're looking at really the footprint of the snowboard from what we say cradle to gate. So from the extraction or the recycling of raw materials all the way through the end of the factory line where it's ready to ship to a distribution center. A lot of the impacts of that come from the raw materials. So things like epoxy resin that are used to keep all of the components together. The core, we use a wooden snowboard core, the lacquer, the top sheet. We actually don't use lacquer anymore, but we did back in 2017. So all of the components that make up the snowboard play a significant role. And then about 20% is coming from the electricity in the manufacturing itself. So we've been using life cycle assessment via our hard goods engineering team to really measure across, our high, medium, and low impact boards. So where do we know that we have materials that are of kind of highest carbon footprint down to those that are maybe lower impact models, and identify key areas of changes to product design. So for instance, we've removed the lacquer top coat, which both was a toxins reduction and a carbon footprint reduction. Materials that we're selecting. So things like using super sap epoxy, which is bio-based and has a 33% lower carbon footprint compared to conventional petroleum-based. Manufacturing processes like reducing the waste in the shaping of a snowboard core. So how much of that wood actually gets retained and used in a product versus becoming kind of sawdust or scrap wood. As well as the energy sources. So really addressing at the factory level, especially at the finished goods level, the kind of that last step in the supply chain, is the power coming from a kind of dirty energy grid, or is it coming from renewable? So we've been working with suppliers to actually install on-site renewable at two of our key snowboard manufacturers to help drive down emissions in those areas. And we've actually been able to achieve for our snowboard line a 21% reduction in the average carbon footprint of our snowboards between the winter 2017 season and the upcoming winter 2022 season.
Awesome. Okay. And we're going to get a little bit more into kind of talking about some of those solutions, some of those levers that Jenn mentioned. You mentioned a lot of them around renewables or low carbon materials. I guess I would put the super sap product in that category of subbing out a lower carbon material for another one. So great. Kim, what about like picking a typical Patagonia product? Maybe it's jacket, maybe something else.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through?
Yeah, so it's a little different. So if we look at like one of our signature jackets, like a better sweater, looking at kind of the fiber that we're selecting, that's where we see a lot of the hotspot in terms of carbon. So it's, using either a virgin input or shifting towards a recycled. You can look at like a conventional, if you're working with cotton, looking at conventional cotton, shifting to an organic or a regenerative organic cotton, you can see a savings in carbon there. So really at the fiber level, brands have a lot of ability to be selective and empowerment there to choose good options that can lower your carbon footprint at the beginning. So looking at kind of your tier 4 aspect of the supply chain. But then as the fiber gets spun into thread and then moves into being made into the textile, that's where we really see the majority of the carbon emissions coming from the manufacturing of a Patagonia jacket, like a better sweater or the down sweater, for example. We're really seeing the impact at tier 2. So that's looking at the textile formation portion of the supply chain where you're weaving or knitting the thread into fabric, and then you're, dyeing and finishing the fabric. So at tier 2, you don't tend to see a lot of electricity use. You see more fossil fuel use or thermal energy demand for, creating steam and boilers. And so that's where, we can talk later on around the solutions for addressing that. When we look at tier 1, when it moves into our cut sew facilities to be made into the final product, that's a really, really small portion of impact there. So we're not super focused in terms of our strategy really at tier 1. We're really looking at, tier 2, because that's where the bulk of the carbon emissions come from, tier 2 and then tier 4 at the fiber selection side of things.
Jen, and just to kind of compare and contrast really quickly. So dyeing and finishing, that's a big hot spot, so to speak, for kind of more of the soft goods, especially when you have dyeing and finishing, you're heating up large amounts of water. And so you're, generally using a boiler, Kim, right, to heat that water, which is typically coal-fired.
Sometimes it can be coal-fired. Other times they could be using heavy fuel oil, which is bunker fuel oil. It's found in like the shipping industry. Those two fuels are really carbon intensive. They may be using natural gas, LPG, LNG, which are other natural gas constituents. Those are kind of the fossil fuels you're typically seeing in your supply chain. And it varies depending on the country that you're in and what the availability of the fuel is.
Okay, so that's in tier 2, what we would say for soft goods. And then for Jen, for hard goods, is more of the focus in tier 1? Just to kind of recap.
A lot of the impacts are at what we'd say is tier 2, so prior to the finished good production, really the components that get assembled into a finished product. With hard goods, it is more difficult to really map out and find the level of transparency in a supply chain that we're able to get on the soft goods side of the house, right? So we know almost all of our tier 2 are material and trim providers for soft goods, and sometimes further down in the supply chain. On the hard goods side, we know of about 50% of them, but the hard goods industry is a bit more opaque. And so it's something we're continually working toward, is to better understand where those components are being manufactured so that we can have a bigger impact on the manufacturing stage. But what we do know is we have these really long-term, strong relationships, really stable relationships with our finished good manufacturers. And there's a much more significant part of the impact in terms of the carbon footprint of a hard good product occurs at tier 1 or the finished good factory, as compared with soft goods. So similarly to Patagonia, we're not focusing so much on the reduction at the tier 1 stage for soft goods, but it is a more important piece for the hard goods side of our house.
Yeah, that's good. Good reminder. Burton has both hard goods and soft goods, obviously. Thank you. So you guys mentioned a few of these, and then I want to kind of go to some of the questions that are in the chat. But within the Climate Action Corps, let's start talking about the decarbonization solutions. Sorry, just to kind of frame us up a little bit. We talk about 4 main levers. There are lots of flavors within each of these, and there are probably more of them because we don't even include here circularity and those opportunities. But material efficiency, so it makes sense. A lot of the carbon comes from the making of the materials, as you described, Kim and Jen. So if you're using less of that material, any chance you can use less or reuse the scrap or any of that, material efficiency can help. That's one lever we talk about. low carbon materials, so recycled content, the super sap product, maybe a lower carbon input. Third bucket of energy efficiency, and there's a couple of questions in the chat specific to energy efficiency and renewable strategies, but energy efficiency obviously being using our energy more efficiently. Lots of ways to do that in a facility, and in our operations here in the U.S. with distribution and things like that. And then the big category of renewables, which many times we sort of think of as the silver bullet, like if we could just move everything to renewable energy, wouldn't that fix the whole problem? But we'll tie that back to some of the things Kim mentioned earlier around fuel types and why that can be difficult. But if you think about those kind of 4 levers, can you just maybe pick a couple of examples or talk a little bit about some of the ways you guys have each pursued those strategies? And we'll start with
problem. Yeah, so we look at it, it's kind of like a 2-tiered approach. So having a strategy around fiber and then having a strategy around supply chain. So kind of like what I alluded to earlier around the fiber side of things, that's where brands have a lot more power to make the decision at the beginning of product creation to say, we're going to select these types of materials over these other materials that we know have a lower carbon footprint. So here at Patagonia, we do a lot of work on material development, really looking at lower carbon materials and really trying to evaluate those different trade-offs. Also on the innovation side from our fiber strategy, looking at where we can shift to like solution dyeing. We know that can decrease our carbon footprint as well, but can't be, spread across the entire line. Not every product can be solution dyed, so that has a limited focus, but at least it's a good solution for some of our product. And then on the supply chain side of things, what I kind of look at really that supplier relationship. How can we, one, have the transparency, know where our materials are being manufactured. So that's the most important step in the process, is really having that transparency, building the relationship with the supplier and with the facility to be able to build trust that, you're working in partnership with them, helping them identify problems and working towards reducing impact. And then at the facility level, really going in and doing kind of an assessment to figure out what the energy pools are before you can go and say, we need you to put solar in your factory, or we need you to invest in energy efficiency. You have to kind of do some kind of landscape assessment. So doing like an energy audit, for example, to focus their efforts on what are those levers at the factory they should be pulling. Energy efficiency in my mind, is the first thing they should be focused on. And a lot of factories are already doing work around energy efficiency. There's a clear return on investment for them. It makes sense from a financial standpoint. It's once you get past the low-hanging fruit towards maybe looking at old equipment and swapping that out to new, better, efficient equipment, that's where it gets more costly. And then the talk about the fossil fuel use, what are the solutions around switching out some of those fossil fuels to more sustainable fuels, like looking at different types of biomass and their trade-offs with that. There's issues with what biomass you might be looking at, also limitations towards, the countries that you're sourcing from. They may not have good alternatives in place. And then there's the renewable electricity stuff you could look at as well, depending on the use of electricity in the factory, whether on-site solar is an option or an off-site investment is doable in the country that they're operating in, whether there's a renewable energy market there.
Kim, it kind of speaks to one of the questions that's here in the chat. Would you say that just starting with the fiber and not necessarily, in the case of natural fibers, going back to on-farm practices and some of the deep work that Patagonia does, but simply, and it's not always so simple, but simply just looking at maybe recycled content or material type there as as a starting point.
Yeah, I think that would be a great starting point. And I recognize a lot of brands don't have the ability to go and work directly at the farm level, but there are some, really good material suppliers out there that can provide good recycled inputs, and that's a good way to shift, your dependency from a virgin input. If it's a synthetic material like polyester, shifting away from that to your recycled polyester is definitely gives you some benefits from a carbon standpoint.
Yeah. So hopefully that answers one of the questions that came on. I want to invite some discussion and certainly to have you guys come and join us on screen if you'd like. we invite you to do that. Jenn, similarly, I guess we could start with a focus on hard goods. Is there an easier, kind of those strategies we talked through, is there an easier starting point than others for hard goods?
Yeah, I think I would say it's not necessarily the easiest thing, but I think the thing we always need to start with when we're looking at how we're designing gear, whether it's hard goods or soft goods, is what is the intended use? How does it need to function in order for the consumer to use it, right? So whether that's an outerwear jacket that needs to be able to last through a multiple night outback, camping adventure, or, if it's a snowboard, ensuring that people are able to have a really good fluid ride, they're able to ensure that board is going to last as long as possible. So is what we're designing going to be designed in a way that's really durable, repairable, are parts replaceable? So thinking really at the outset about the design, I think, is the most important first step when you're looking at making change to a product itself. There are opportunities that we've found where there's some low-hanging fruit, where there's actually a cost savings and a sustainability improvement just by looking at what we're making through the lens of sustainability. We've been able to identify, for instance, that the binding disc, so the piece that you actually mount a binding onto a snowboard with, we typically have to send 2 sets of discs because we have a special Burton mounting for our own snowboards, and then there's the more standard industry mounting system. And through the lens of carbon reduction, we were able to identify that we could actually make 1 disc and just design the different configurations of how the bolts go into the board into a singular disc. So we now have the unidisc, and so we're able to send 1 set instead of 2 sets of these metal components. And so that's, an immediate carbon reduction and cost savings opportunity that we, maybe we should have seen that beforehand, but really the sustainability case is what drove us to look at re-engineering it, right? To put effort and resources toward that project. I think it can be really difficult to redesign hard goods gear for lower impact. So I think materials are really a big opportunity to plug in, right? So if the functionality can't change significantly, then what are we making the components out of? And I think moving increasingly toward recycled metals and recycled plastic components is a big opportunity that we're seeing a lot of shift in the industry. Unlike the soft goods industry, where you are able to identify perhaps a large supply for recycled polyester, there's not necessarily that same easy way to kind of tap into recycled components on the hard goods side right now. So it takes a little bit more work. But I think that supply chain really is developing. And then the energy input really is one of the most important things to look at, because if we consider where the majority of components are created, manufactured for hard goods in particular, it really is in areas where there aren't typically very clean energy grids. And so how do we ensure that we're really helping to address that at a factory level, but also putting pressure on policy throughout the world to really help make that change where we're shifting toward cleaner energy.
Yeah. Awesome. So engaging your design teams, thinking about materials first, whether that's hard goods or soft goods. There was a question about the HIG I think I saw that might be worth addressing. Maybe while I'm reading the question, a little bit of if you guys are using HIG for materials comparisons and how, and whether that's working as well for hard goods or soft goods, knowing, as I think we all do, that tool was really developed a lot for primarily apparel and footwear and is full of great soft goods information, maybe doesn't have as much hard goods material information. So Kim, go ahead. It seemed, or Jenn,
I was just going to say,
Alyssa,
HIG, if you're interested in joining us on screen, you've joined me on speaking circuits. I'd love to have you jump in and add some color from a manufacturer lens. I think that both Burton and Patagonia possibly source from BMIS.
Yeah, we do
BMIS.
use,
okay, awesome.
We've used the MSI for a long time. We have a team here at Patagonia that does all of our LCA work. And I feel like, for our brand, we're shifting more to trying to get more supplier specific data, incorporating that into our LCA. So I know that team internally works really hard with approaching different suppliers to commission those supplier-specific LCAs, but those are very costly. And we share information that we get access to, but we've been a huge supporter of the HIG, different modules, the MSI in particular. On the factory side of things, we do also utilize the FEM. So we have all of our suppliers, tier 1 and tier 2, complete FEM every single year, which is great, gives us a nice snapshot of their facility level impacts.
Okay, cool. So you did a 2 for there and answered Benjamin's question too. Alyssa, hi, it worked. Thanks for joining us.
But hi, everybody.
I know not all of us were maybe ready, but you're ready.
No, thanks for the answer to the question. And my question really, I guess, Kim, you kind of addressed it, is that crossover point between MSI and FEM, because obviously how we process the materials and the information you get with the FEM is directly translated into this embedded carbon nature of the product that you use. And without getting in, LCA is a very important tool. It's also a very time, money, resource intensive tool to do appropriately to a level that's usable for a brand and executable for a manufacturer. So that's where, I'm trying to make sure I understand what brands need to be successful, and also to how to celebrate and differentiate the work that we are doing in our factory, and how to make sure that that's translating so that it's understood that investments we're making in energy efficiency and renewable energy in our factory should flow through and give you a better output at the materials level. How will you see that? How will you know? How can we engage with brands to have that discussion?
I'm a big advocate for that work, because my focus is at the facility level. So it's taking the knowledge I have of what I'm seeing in the factories and giving that to our teams that are working with the MSI, looking at how we can incorporate that data so we give our product teams better insights into the carbon impacts of the choices that they're making from the materials they're selecting. So they get the full snapshot, not just understanding the benefits from some of the innovation work or the benefits from the fiber selection, but really looking at the benefits for those specific facilities that are going above and beyond that. I feel, to your point, Alyssa, they haven't been getting the recognition they deserve, because our industry has been utilizing LCA because it's the best tool we have. But now that we're getting better data from our facilities, we need to work as an industry to figure out how we can really bring the two data sets together to make better informed decisions.
Cool.
I'll bring Stuart on in a second Stuart, I can bring you on in a second to chat through that.
I'm going to go back to listening, but thank you.
Alyssa, you got anything
Thanks for coming on, Alyssa.
Yeah,
Sorry for calling you out.
Great job.
Thanks, Alyssa. Thanks for being our first brave soul.
Yeah, I was just going to say, one thing that we do at Burton is supplier scorecarding. So we're looking at our tier 1, our finished goods factories right now, but we intend to roll that out as well to our tier 2 partners throughout our supply chain. So what we look at through our fourfold group, I think you have the same at Patagonia, are very similar, is we're looking at quality, the commercialization, supply planning, as well as sustainability, and it's a balanced scorecard. And some of what we're looking at in terms of what earns you points, what shows that you're really a strong partner for us, is actually completing the HIG modules, performance across all of these types of benchmarking systems and reporting platforms. So we are really looking at both the social and environmental data and taking that into strong consideration in who we continue to partner with, who we lean into harder, and who we seek in the future to really be working with as a strong supply chain partner. So it is part of the overall equation in terms of how we look at supplier management and how we think about the future of sourcing at our company.
Great. And since we're still on materials and there are a few questions around that, before we go into sort of some of the trickier issues around renewable energy, even energy efficiency, in working, really partnering and working kind of in a high touch way with your suppliers and with factories. I just want to see, Stuart, if you would like to come on, I can bring you on, or you can answer it in the chat. I think you just need to click the green join share my audio and video, and I can bring you on, Stuart Shepard, to chat a little bit about the HIG. There you are. Okay, here it comes. Here he comes, I believe. All right, good, Stuart, hey, how are you?
Nice to see you, everybody.
Yeah,
Sorry,
you
I wasn't
too.
planning to be on video like everybody else.
Okay, so hey, yeah.
Kitchen.
I love it. Yeah, you're probably our resident HIG expert, so maybe talking a little bit about what's available in that database for soft goods and hard goods.
It's a very wide-ranging question. I mean, with the latest update, we have 92 different materials, which doesn't sound like a lot, but of course they can all be customized in multiple ways, up to 6 or 7 different process stages for each one of those 92 materials. And they are split between textiles, obviously, because we're talking about the textile and footwear industry, but we're also looking into metals, wood-based materials, and we do have TPU and things like that. So to Alyssa's question, if you have LCA data for your own materials, we're very happy to integrate that into the tools. And actually, this is a call to any and all of you that have that kind of data. You can submit it to the tools so that it's in there. It's really good because it increases the whole industry's both knowledge but access to those materials. It's a way for you to differentiate and to show the work that you have been doing if you want to submit it. And as for more materials, we're constantly updating the database based on user requests. I know we're actually working right now to take into account the needs of all the hard goods suppliers. I think we have a project running. So there's going to be an update soon, the next update of the database in June. So we're working closely on trying to, with the OIA as well, and trying to integrate the needs of a wider set of the industry than just apparel and footwear.
Yeah, great. And so for those not familiar, maybe Stuart, you could put a link in the chat to around the HIG Material Sustainability Index. You can do things like compare the carbon impact and other sustainability, endpoints or data points of recycled content with non-recycled content. Suppliers like Bemis can add their material data into the HIG MSI to be able to, for users to be able to compare that to other material types. So it's a really powerful tool. OIA is actually working on identifying and prioritizing more hard goods materials to be added, like aluminum and stainless steel and things like that, to help designers and product developers really use the tool to inform product design. Since we identified that's an important place to start. So I guess, Stuart, thank you for coming on. I'm going to say goodbye now, and let's talk a little bit in our just remaining minutes. There's a couple of questions that have come up around some of these harder to focus areas, like maybe we'll save policy and sort of bigger system change, especially abroad, for a different conversation. But what are some of the ways, it may be difficult for a smaller brand or a brand just getting started, a brand who's newer to this, to begin working with their supply chain on, just even an energy audit or beginning this process. So I'm wondering if you guys have any suggestions for kind of getting that process going that you'd share with the group, especially for some of the, I think we have a number of sort of smaller brands or brands who are just getting started in this space who do want to begin that conversation with the supply chain.
The first thing is just around understanding where your facilities are. So, a lot of folks haven't been able to do the supply chain mapping and even getting in, let's start with tier 1, start there, and then kind of build your way down to tier 2, depending on, where, if you're a hard goods or a soft goods company. You don't want to spread yourself too thin. So, it's completely admirable to start at tier 1 if that's where you have your relationships, but start the conversations with your suppliers. You could ask them to complete HIG FEM. What we're seeing is a lot of facilities are completing it. So you may be surprised they might already have completed it and they could share it with you. That's the benefit to that tool, is that it's kind of being adopted across the industry. So there's not all these additional random requests for different types of assessments. which I know manufacturers, they really appreciate. So that could be a good way to start to gather some information so you can understand, well, where are the hotspots? Maybe focus your efforts a bit more on certain suppliers that you want to partner with. You could identify where maybe coal is being consumed in your supply chain and maybe start there, working with a couple suppliers, and also looking at brand collaborations. I feel like for our industry, that is really how this work is going to be successful in the supply chain, is all of us coming together and collaborating, having a single ask to a facility, all working in partnership with the same goals, but hearing from our manufacturers as well. I think that's the other problem. We're setting ambitious goals and targets and pushing them on the supply chain, and our manufacturers are already dealing with a lot of requests. So really hearing from them, understanding what they're doing, where they see makes the most sense for their carbon journey. Engaging in that two-way conversation, I think will be really important when we start talking about brand collaboration. So using the OIA, using the SAC, those are all great platforms to start these conversations.
Maybe because I would be remiss to not give a plug for the Climate Action course, since that's what we're all about, is collaboration in the supply chain. And Jesse, if you're still on, I just wanted to see if you might type that into the chat. A lot of this work has to be done, particularly for smaller brands, by coming together and having sort of a common ask, a common engagement platform with the supply chain. And so we will be launching several collabs this coming year to do just that. Thank you, Jesse. Before we go to our kind of last set of questions here that I'm seeing in the chat and see if anyone else wants to join us, Jen, anything you want to add there just around really digging in with the supply chain?
Happy to put another plug in for the Climate Action Corps, but similar collaboration and informal collaboration among peers and competitors. I mean, a lot of the people that, a lot of the companies and the people at the companies that Burton is working with on this supply chain work and really sharing information with across social and environmental responsibility are technically our competitors in the market, right? But we all recognize that we need to be creating system level change, moving forward together, and that, kind of getting to Paul's question about small businesses, no individual business, even about a Patagonia or Burton, can make this change alone. We have to move forward as an industry. And so I think that there's a lot of mentoring, there's a lot of collaboration out there that you can tap into if you just start kind of asking around, but also plugging in through more formal outlets like the Climate Action Corps. And then in terms of supplier relationships, I would just say, one thing that's really important to keep in mind is that we're all in transition. We all feel this pressure, especially around climate, setting ambitious carbon reduction targets and immediately taking action. And what can we address tomorrow? And just making sure that we're checking in about the transition period, right? Like the idea that we don't want to start swapping suppliers. We don't want to all run toward those suppliers that already have their systems in place for efficiency. You make a bigger, more sustainable long-term impact in the world by really leaning into your existing supplier relationships and trying to partner toward creating change. And so just really encouraging that while it is important, to choose recycled polyester over virgin, or, maybe think about partnering if you're in the textile space on organic in transition, not just going directly to sourcing organic cotton, but you have an opportunity to step in and say, we're going to support you for the next 3 years as you transition toward having a certified logo for organic cotton. So just thinking differently about what is the role of business and brands in context of the overall supply chain and making long-term sustainable change, not just immediate switches to be kind of more of the consumer-friendly version of sustainable. There's a lot of complexity in the system.
Amen. I'm sure Kim is just, yes, and I can see you nodding your head. And that, those long-term relationships, Kim, as we've chatted about a lot, maybe you want to say a couple words here, but those can, once you get the results of the energy audit and it's time to make that big capital investment in a new, more energy efficient equipment or a different fuel type, which frankly is going to be more expensive, you've set that solid ground for long-term relationships with your suppliers for them to actually feel comfortable making those investments.
And that's so important in our industry is, again, kind of to Jen's point, like leaning in on your existing suppliers, kind of rewarding those behaviors, incentivizing those behaviors. We've surveyed a large number of our suppliers just to understand where they are in their carbon journey, what they've done, what their challenges are, how could we support. And, you know, most suppliers aren't saying, write me a check to make these investments. They're saying just, you know, commitment is what they're wanting from the industry, that they know that you're going to be with them long term, so they have that stability, so they can make those investments, and they know you're going to be there over time, and you're going to reward them for that hard work that they're doing in their factories.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, Nicola, you had the same kind of question that I had jotted down in the back of my head, back of the napkin here, just to make sure we address, which is that Jenn and Kim, if you had a magic wand, you could wave. This is a little different than my question, but similar, and you could create sort of a dream supply chain solution. So, you know, pick a thing. What would it be? What would be the most impactful and
That's a
desired
tough one. There's so many things I'd like to change. I think looking at like the energy use in the supply chain, like I'm looking at tier 2, looking at the thermal energy, that doesn't just impact our industry. That's industries across the board are trying to figure out a solution for that. There are lots of facilities still burning coal and heavy fuel oil. How do we transition away from natural gas? Having a good viable solution that's available in all of our sourcing countries, that's economically suitable alternative, like that to me is, if we could address that, that would not just have broad impact for our industry, it would have huge impact across multiple industries. The thermal heating demand, that needs to be solved. So that's, you know, my hope is that we're going to find a good solution for that can be scalable.
And that's not something that, you know, it's hard for renewables to address that specifically, right? Like how?
Yeah, with putting like solar on a factory, you could electrify your factory, so you could electrify your boilers. But what we see with solar is when you put it on a factory, it's not going to cover 100% of the electricity demand. So that's the limitation to solar. So you're always going to have, you know, maybe an offsite investment as well to cover that. But, you know, electrification is also something to consider. But if you're not going to be relying on renewables on your factory, you have to think about what is the grid mix. So then are you just relying more on like a dirty grid opposed to maybe using a fossil fuel that might have a lower carbon content than what the grid mix is? So it's super complex, not straightforward. There's no smoking gun per se. Like there's no like one thing that you can go towards that's going to solve everything. That's, you know, the complexities with decarbonizing supply chains.
Awesome. Yeah, we could probably do a whole session on the thermal energy question and finding alternatives, financing solutions for new things. Nicola mentioned geothermal and biothermal. Depends on the country. Jenn, what about you? What would you do with your
Jets, I'll
wand?
speak up. My magic wand would be that for hard goods specifically, that all of the components could be made from natural regenerative materials. I think the biggest problem we have is we are heavily reliant on metals and petroleum, and would love to be able to transition our core materials, you know, increasingly toward things that are regenerative.
Some examples. So bio-based materials for the plastics. Yeah. Durable enough materials to replace the metals. I mean, yeah. I know we're at time. Any final questions, or anyone want to pop on screen in the final minute? No. Well, thanks for those who joined us here today and for all of your awesome questions. I know the session's recorded, so there'll be a chance to revisit some of these. And there are some questions we didn't get to, so we'll make a note of those. And hopefully there'll be a way for us to share back with those of you who attended some more specific answers to some of these questions. And have a great couple of days, everybody. Thanks for joining us.